Greetings! Folks, it is now very much summertime. I got in my car yesterday and it said it was 35 degrees. Spicy! So now that summer is well and truly underway, I'm going to start on my concept for ethereal summer. And you may have seen my ethereal spring videos. This is largely the same concept. You take a season and you make it ethereal. So I have less of a well thought out plan this time, but basically
Ren Fae-re.
I just want to make something Ren Fae-re looking with a flower crown. So I have this green, I think it's like a drapery fabric, but it's like a really pretty sage green and it's got some like little line details in it. So I'm going to make an overdress with that. And then this plain, I think this is just a linen cotton blend or linen and rayon, linen and something to make the linen cheaper because I'm cheap, so you know, it all maths. Oh, hello, this is Bella. I don't know if we've met her yet, but this is Bella. We've got some lights. Oh, this shot has gone to hell. So yeah, what I'm going to do is use this to make like an underdress, a chemise. And then this will lace up over the top and be kind of open in the front. And then flower crown, and that's all she wrote. I've never been to a Ren Fair. Bring the Ren Fair to you. So that's the plan. Let's do it. Might have been my least awkward intro yet.
Nice.
Oh, it's still filming. So my plan for the chemise is to use this already kind of big on me tank top as a template and just kind of trace it, but add like quite a bit to each side so that the chemise will have to be gathered down. And then it'll probably be about knee length, maybe like mid-thigh length, and then there will be roughly tiers underneath. So I'm just gonna like go for it. I'm not gonna make a mock-up because I'm wild and crazy. I placed the folded shirt on top of the fabric and extended the neckline to meet the folded edge. Then I traced around the rest of the shirt and measured down to about knee length, then cut out the traced shape with room for seam allowance. I repeated the same process with the shirt folded the opposite way to get the back pattern. For the ruffles, I cut a slit at the length I wanted and proceeded to just rip the fabric to get even strips. My cat was not happy about being moved from her bed, but apparently she wasn't unhappy enough to leave. And she attacks me in 3, 2, 1. And then continues to lay there like she didn't just throw a hissy fit. I cut 2 lengths of fabric for this tier, trimmed some of the selvage fluff without trimming away too much of the actual selvage edge, then sewed them together end to end to form one big loop. Because I was sewing the selvage edges together, I just sewed them with a straight stitch instead of sewing them with French seams. I sewed the front and back dress pieces together with 1 cm seam allowance. With the side and shoulder seams sewn, I could flat fell them by trimming one of the seam allowances down to 0.5 cm, then folding the long side over and top stitching in place. The bottom ruffle was 4 strips of fabric sewn together end to end into a loop again. To gather this piece, I increased the tension on my sewing machine, which naturally gathers up the fabric. This saved a lot of time, but it also meant the strip needed to be folded in half and sewn before ruffling, so I couldn't sandwich the raw edge of the other layer in between the layers of the ruffle. So I was left with the predicament of what to do with all the raw seams inside the garment. More on this a bit later. So the base of the underdress shift chemise thing is finished. Ruffles there. The middle layer probably could have been a little bit longer, so it would be more gathered, but that's fine. It's cool. Next up, I'm going to have to deal with this. So I'm just gonna gather down the front and back, and then this is like very close to done. I have to do the sleeves. I don't know if I want this to be gatherable via like a tie or just if it should be permanently gathered. So I think it might be easier to just permanently gather it. and then bind it with bias tape. So I think that's what we're gonna do now. After gathering down the front and back of the chemise, I then made some bias tape that I'd use to bind the neckline. I sewed it first to the front, then folded the tape over and whip stitched it down on the inside. Ethereal Summer, day 2. So yesterday I finished, what you see here, the base of the chemise, underdress, shift, whatever the heck this is. It's so cute. It looks like a haunted Victorian lady's ghost, and I think I'm going to end up wearing it all the time, not just for this costume. The binding along the neckline is done. I obviously have to attach the sleeves, and also underneath the seams are all raw, and I was planning on doing a felled seam here, but then I cut the one side too short. Why is that my curse? So I think I'm just going to trim all of the seam allowances and then bind them again with bias tape. So I have some more bias tape to make. But I have a bunch of leftover fabric, so I should be able to do that. So time to make some bias tape. Making bias tape isn't exactly difficult, but I've been making it an awful lot lately and I kind of hate it now. I get really sweaty from the iron and then my legs stick to the kitchen chair, but it's so useful, so I have to keep making it. But sometimes you have to make sacrifices in order to turn yourself into an ethereal elf maiden. I'll link a video in the description for making your own continuous bias tape. At one point, I walked into the laundry room, and when I came back, the chemise was on the dress form, looking like a Victorian ghost, and I lost my cool. Anyway, back to sewing. I trimmed down the seam allowances and pinned and top stitched the bias tapes to hide the raw edges. I repeated this for the middle and bottom ruffle tiers. This was not the best solution because it added a lot of weight and bulk to the seams, but I really couldn't think of anything else to do. If you have any suggestions for a better way to finish seams when one layer is more ruffled than the other, please leave me a comment and let me know. Now it was time for the sleeves. I used my self-drafted puff sleeve pattern that I use for literally everything and sewed them together with French seams, then sewed a gathering thread along the top so the sleeve could be gathered down to fit into the chemise. I also gathered down the bottom of the sleeve and bound both the cuff and the arm side with, you guessed it, more bias tape. Yesterday I finished the chemise underdress thing, this Victorian looking nightgown thing. I love it. I wore it around the house last night after I finished making it. So yeah, sleeves are on. I bound the cuffs with bias tape. I actually bound pretty much everything with bias tape. It's not a perfect solution. So the seams now are really bulky and heavy. I don't know a better way to finish seams when one piece of the seam, one half is gathered and the other half isn't. So if you have any suggestions, do let me know because there's got to be a better way. I just don't know what it is. But I think this is really cute. If I had known I was gonna love this so much, I would have put pockets in it. I didn't think I'd want to wear it around, but I only ever want to wear it around. It's so comfy and I feel like I'm haunting my own house. I love that. Now that this is done, all that I have left to do is the overdress thing, sewing wise. I mean, I have to make the flower crown, but that would involve leaving my house to go buy flowers. I don't want to do that, so I'm gonna work on the overdress today. So let's do that. Using my trusty Arya Stark jacket pattern, I traced the center front panel so I could alter it to the shape I wanted. I took out some of the width from the center front so there'd be a lacing gap and squared up the neckline. No, it's cool. I wasn't about to cut out fabric or anything. Their tails are overlapped and they were just twitching their tails at each other. Why is your tail on my tail? Why is your tail on my tail? But yeah, I would like to cut some fabric now if you guys could vacate Oh my gosh. So I made a mock-up of that pattern, or rather I reused the same mock-up that I use all the time because I only ever use this pattern. And I only ever modify the center front panel. So basically I threw it on over the chemise and it is close. I think because I want to have a lacing gap, so where I've drawn this line here, I think that's going to be the new pattern. I don't even know. Where I've drawn this line, I think, is where I'm going to have the pattern end. And then also, wait, why did I put this here? Oh, I need to drop the neckline down a little bit. Basically, I think I want it to be underneath where the chemise is. Yeah, that sounds right. So I'm going to drop this down like way the heck down here, plus some seam allowance, and then bring this in over here. But other than that, it should be good. So I'm going to make those changes on the pattern and then cut out the fabric pieces. I cut out enough fabric pieces to make up both a lining and an outer layer. This fabric was super slippery and shifty, so it was a bit of a nightmare to work with, but using lots of pins definitely helps with that. I also modified the center back neckline a bit, lining it up to be the same width as the front straps and making it square rather than round. Well, that was tricky. This fabric is very slippery, so it was kind of a pain to sew. But the bodice layers are both sewn together, one for the lining and one for the outer layer. So I'm going to iron open the seam allowances and then make some bias tape so that I can make boning channels, and then I'll sew those into the lining layer and then sew both of the layers together. If I thought making bias tape was bad before, it was extra annoying this time because the fabric was so slippery, but I made it work somehow. My guess is with extreme stubbornness, which is how I accomplished most things. Once the bias tape was finished, I sewed it down to form the boning channels. Wow, that was really hard to do. This fabric is slippery and shifty, so they're not super pretty, but I have boning channels sewn in. And so far I only have 2 that will go around the eyelets and 1 over the center front like bust seam. And I didn't add any more boning channels. I don't really think of this as a super structured garment. I mostly wanted like reinforcement and support around the eyelet holes. So I don't know if I want to add any more, mostly because that was hard to do. I laid the 2 bodice layers on top of each other with right sides together and lined up the seams. Then I sewed around the edges, leaving the bottom and straps open. With the layers sewed together, I trimmed down the seam allowances and clipped into the corners and curves so I could turn it right side out and iron it flat. For the skirt pieces, I cut a rectangle to the correct length with the fabric on the fold, then cut that rectangle into almost triangles, but with a flat top instead of a point. This left me with 1 wider piece because of the fold and 2 narrow ones. I repeated the process and was left with 2 wider slices and 4 narrow ones. I arranged these with a narrow piece at each side of center front, then a wide piece next to those, and 2 more narrow pieces that met at center back, basically forming a flared skirt. So I have sewn all the skirt panels together with French seams so there's no raw edges, and I took in the sides, like folded it in twice and hemmed it so that that is all clean. So now I can gather the skirt down and add it to the bodice. But before that, I'm just going to add the bones to the bodice and then, yeah, all that other stuff I just said. Great. I googled synthetic whalebone Canada and found these German plastic bones, which I pretty much use exclusively now. They're soft enough to be cut with scissors, but strong enough to give structure to your garments. I got mine from Farthingale's corset making supplies, and they're awesome. I'm sure you're supposed to sand and tip them, but I always just cut them into a reasonably round shape, and I've never had any problems with them. Then I can slide them into the bodice and move on with the skirt. I repeated the same process of increasing the tension on my machine and sewed a straight stitch along the top of the skirt, which does a lot of the gathering work for you. I had to do some minor adjusting to fit the skirt to the bodice because it was a bit too gathered, but then I could pin and sew it to the lining layer. So, the overdress is like pretty much done. Obviously it doesn't have eyelets yet, so you know I can't like close it. But I think it looks super cute. I also... Hello? What was that? The bottom is not hemmed. I'm going to hang it on my dress form so that it stretches out a little. And then I just have to add the eyelets. And then I think it's good. Wow. I added metal eyelets first, which I then covered in a matching embroidery floss. This is probably a bit unnecessary. One or the other is definitely sufficient, but this way my eyelets are not only uniform in shape and size, but they're super secure. I also really like having some hand sewing to do while sitting and watching movies or TV, so I like to make things harder for myself on purpose sometimes. The last thing to do for this project is the flower crown. So I have this, I don't know what kind of wire this is, some kind of floral wire, I don't know. I've had it in my craft drawer forever and I use it occasionally. So I made a little base of the crown with that, and I put my wig on and just measured around the, you know, the size of my head. Not the shape of my head, this is a little lumpy, but it's easy to reform. And hopefully that's strong enough, I think it should be fine. And then I have these flowers from the Looney Plus, the dollar store near me, and I'm just basically, I mean, you can kind of shape them, so that's my plan, is to just use the whole thing and just wrap it around and then cut off the bases. And yeah, it should be pretty easy, and I'll probably just tie them on with more pieces of wire. I was also thinking that I might add ribbon hanging down. So my mom used to do Ukrainian dancing, and she wore this really beautiful flower crown and it had ribbons hanging down the back. So I might do that as well if I have any ribbon that is not ugly. So flower crown base, let's do it. Cutting the flowers was a struggle, so I had to get my partner to help me. It helped to have him hold the stem steady so I could cut it. This footage looks hilarious to me, like I have an extra set of arms, so I hope you enjoyed watching that a bunch of times. And moving on. With the flowers trimmed, I could cut little pieces of wire and wrap it around in several spots to secure them. I'm sure there are better, safer ways to do this so you don't have any wire poking into your head, but I figured the wig would protect me from that, right? I kept adding more flowers until I liked how it looked, then added some green and blue ribbon just by folding a strand in half and looping it around the crown, and with that, the costume was complete. I'm really happy with how this costume turned out, and I felt so darn comfortable in this outfit, like it's something I was meant to wear. Hashtag make Ren Fae-re happen 2021. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you again soon.